This is a reading from the Notebooks by Maria Valtorta, 1944, January the 20th. Jesus says, I want to explain to you the epistle and gospel at Mass yesterday. Yesterday you were too tired for me to do so. Whoever perseveres until the end will be saved, the gospel passage states. Footnote, Matthew chapter 10, verse 22, and chapter 24, verse 13. And the epistle says, do not cast aside your confidence, then, for which a great reward is reserved. You now need patience, so that by doing the will of God you may obtain what has been promised to you. For in a little while the one who is to come will come, and he will not delay. But the just man lives by faith. However, if he turns back, he will no longer be pleasing to my soul. Footnote, Hebrews chapter 10, verses 35 to 38. That's it, daughter. Always bear in mind these luminous words in your present state of dejection, and the many future ones, all of them resulting from the anti-charity which surrounds you. It is these words which encourage those martyred by tyrants, and those martyred by relatives or superiors. It is necessary to persevere until the end, in spite of the mockery, clashes, pressures, and afflictions. I am the reward given to those persevering. Consider, Maria, I, your Jesus. What will these thorns now piercing you and bringing you so much suffering be for you then? A trifle, rather more than a trifle, a joy. You will gaze at them with love. You will kiss them with gratitude, because precisely because of them you will possess me more and more powerfully. Every affliction overcome unbendingly is an increase in heavenly fusion. Remember this. There everything is seen in a new light. Even those whom you now love only out of love for me, for their way of acting would spur your humanity not to love them, will be loved by you there on your own, because you will see them as means that have given you the infinite treasure that I am. The final prayer of the martyrs was for their executioners, that they might arrive at the light. The final prayer of the saints for their oppressors, that they might arrive at charity. You do not know, but I will tell you this. Many superiors at convents, whom humanity, alive in them, in spite of their habit signifying renunciation of the flesh, led to pride and thus anti-charity towards their subjects, have arrived at repentance and gone from it to spiritual rebirth, the origin of birth in heaven, precisely through the prayers of a saint, who repaid their acts of harshness and injustice with acts of supernatural love, praying and suffering for the redemption of that heart which was so lacking in benevolence towards them. Now in heaven, my angels gaze at both the oppressed and the oppressor side by side, and the oppressor is not the superior now. It is the oppressed one, who, like a loving father, looks joyfully at the one who he has saved, who has entered eternal life, thanks to his true love. The light of these spirits who saved their tormentors is a special light, and comes from the ray of my open side, of my heart, which prayed on the cross for those crucifying it, since those who pray for the ones causing them suffering are like me, who prayed for my executioners. Footnote, Luke chapter 23, verses 24. Trust in me, who see, and patience towards others, towards the things harassing you. The reward is such as to warrant every sacrifice, and it will not be long in coming. Do not be dejected. Let others be what they want to be. As for you, be mine, and that's enough. Indeed, pray. It is the greatest charity that others may be what I want them to be, and be mine increasingly. Go in peace. I bless you. The description of the vision you have should be inserted here. Footnote. This annotation included here by the writer precedes the dictation published below for the same date at 11:30 p.m. The vision referred to follows here. It was written twice with additions in the second draft by way of the 2 8-page texts which were separated from the handwritten notebooks and then introduced at this point. 4 p.m. As a comfort for my sadness, the good Jesus grants me the following vision, which I hasten to describe to you, with the thought that you may be pleased with it. I am witnessing the deposition of Agnes. Footnote. This may be considered a sequel to the martyrdom of Agnes, written on January 13th. I see the garden of a patrician's house. I do not know if it is the house of Agnes's father or of another Christian family. After all, that is not very important. In short, I see a very ample garden with roads and lanes, flower beds, fish ponds, and plants with long stems. It is evening, I might say night, since there are already thick shadows. The place is illuminated by lovely moonlight and scattered torches or lamps of some kind. I see the flames curving from time to time before the slight evening wind. The moon is in the first quarter, and I thus think it is 8 p.m., or even before 8, since the moon has barely risen above the horizon, and in January it rises early, especially when it is its initial phase. At first I see nothing else. The scene then becomes livelier. Many people with lamps and torches enter the garden, and the light grows. They are undoubtedly men and women Christians, led by their priests and deacons to the burial of Agnes. At a certain moment one of the doors of the house opens, and a brightly illuminated peristyle appears, parallel to the street, of course, for facing this door towards the inside, shall we say. There is another one, which also opens as if someone had knocked outside, and a group of people enters, bearing a body, wrapped in a shroud, on a stretcher. After the stretcher has been set down in the middle of this peristyle, and the door along the street closed, the body is uncovered, reverently lifted up, and placed on another kind of stretcher, resembling a cot without panels, covered with very opulent dark red cloth, which I could describe as embroidery. I see that the martyr has already been washed and laid out. There is no longer blood on her face and hair, or her clothing. They must have dressed her in a clean tunic, since there is no stain on it. The young martyr's face is so pale that she looks like a marble statue, but she is very peaceful. She is smiling. Her hair is loose under the white veil entirely covering her. But she is veiled first of all by her long blonde hair, a real cloak of gold enveloping her down to her knees. Her hands are joined over her breast and are holding a palm. The wound on her neck is not visible. They have mercifully covered it with the golden locks and white veil. Around her is a throng of relatives who are soundlessly weeping and kissing her waxen face and marble brow, family members, companions in faith, and priests. A venerable old man comes in, flanked by two others. They are all dressed like Romans at that time. From what is taking place, I understand that the old man is the pontiff, or one of his vicars, but I would say he is the pontiff, for they all kneel when he enters and blesses. He too draws near the martyr and prays over her. He then puts on his liturgical vestments, as do the two deacons accompanying him, and many of the priests scattered among the Christians, and the funeral train is formed. A group of virgins, including Emerentiana, draw close to the stretcher and lift it up. Though Agnes, on being viewed stretched out, seems taller than when alive, the weight must not be excessive. She is a child and not very buxom. The virgins are all dressed and veiled in white, a hedge of lilies around a faded lily, laid out on the purple of the funeral cloth. At the forefront are the pontiff and the priests, preceded and flanked by ushers with torches. Behind them are the virgins with the martyr, then the parents, relatives, and Christians, all of them with lamps, proceed along the path towards the place where the garden borders on what I think is open countryside. It is clear that there are no other houses afterwards, but other plants and meadows. The scene is placid and solemn. The moon is kissing the snow-white body, and the wind is caressing it. I see a blonde lock waving tenuously in the slight breeze. The Christians are singing in a low voice. At first I find it hard to understand, perhaps because I am distracted on seeing so many things. I then make out the words of the sacred melody in Latin, and remember having known it. I wonder where I have heard or read it. In the meantime, they have arrived at a sort of shaft which is quite wide at its mouth, and into which one can descend by a little stairway cut into the tufa, or sandstone, as the case may be. The leading figures gradually go down, and in the underground cavity, which has been dug in a circular shape, with many tunnels running off in different directions, which seem to have barely been begun, the voices become louder and more solemn. Now I remember clearly. They are the words of the Apocalypse, at the point where there is mention of that canticle, which may be sung only by those who did not contaminate themselves on earth. Footnote, Revelation chapter 14, verses 1 through 5. But not all of it is uttered. It is uttered in that way. They were singing that hymn so slowly that I was able to transcribe it, and I then checked to see if my asininity had made a lot of mistakes in Latin. Footnote: the transcription of the Latin text which follows does not contain errors. Et vidi supra montem Sion agnum stantem. The men were singing. Et audivi vocem de cielo tamquam vocem aquarum multarum. The women responded. Sicut citaro dorum citarisantium in citaris suis, et cantabant quasi canticum novum. Et nemo poterat dicere canticum, nisi illa, 144,000, qui empti sunt de terra. I sunt quicum milieribus non sunt coinquinati, virgines enim sunt. I secuntur agnum cuquamque idierit. I empti sunt ex hominibus primitiae Deo et agno, sine macula enim sunt ante thronum Dei. The men and women were singing the lines alternately, a heavenly harmony. There were tears in my eyes, and there is still a kind of river of sweetness in me, which soothes everything. I hear it above all the noises around me. A last farewell by the relatives, and the body is then upraised and carried towards the long, narrow burial niche scooped out of the sandstone, sidelong and not lengthwise. The pontiff accompanies the deposition with the following words: Veni, sponsa Christi, veni, Agnes Sanctissima, requiescant in pace. A stone is positioned and secured over the opening. The vision comes to a halt there. I feel at peace, as if I, too, had been carried into that little burial niche alongside the sweet child, waiting to rise again with her in Christ after the martyrdom, as if I, like her, had already emerged from the torments and wickedness of the world, and were singing at her side the canticle which only those who have been rescued from the earth sing. It is indeed beautiful to die for Jesus. It is indeed beautiful to be able to say to oneself, my pain obtains paradise for me. I now recollect myself, waiting for you to come. I recollect myself in the echo of that sweet song, so full of promises for those who have given themselves to the service of the Lamb, and follow him in all he wills. Written again on the morning of the 23rd, out of fear that those detached pages might get lost. Footnote, see also note 95. I see the garden of a patrician's house. There are roads, flower beds, fish ponds, little meadows, and long-stemmed plants. It seems vast and must border on the open countryside or other enormous gardens, as I later observe, for where it ends there are no houses, but other meadows and plants. At the beginning of the vision there are no people in the garden. I see it in the brightness of light provided here and there by oil lanterns or torches set at different points. I see the reddish flames which bend from time to time in the light evening wind. There is also moonlight. The moon is in its initial phase, for the illuminated section is thin and facing westward. Given the season and the position of the moon, which has barely risen in the sky, I think it must be the early hours of the night, which comes on very soon at this time of year. Later on I observe near the house, which seems to be entirely closed up as if it were empty, many groups of men and women, dressed as in that time, accompanied by other men who seem to be invested with a special role and dignity, and whom all obey respectfully. I understand that they are the Christians who have come to Agnes's funeral. Many have little oil lanterns, and this fact enables me to see that there are some among the men with short, I would say close-shaven hair, and short greyish robes, and others with better groomed hair, which is also short, however, and long, light-coloured robes with cloaks. One of the edges of each cloak passes over their heads as a hood. Among the women, too, some are dressed modestly and in dark colours, while others are better dressed, wearing light colours. A large group is dressed in white, with white veils on their heads. Footnote. The italics in the text indicate, as usual, the words which are underlined in the handwritten version. In this description, however, all the underlining is in different ink, and thus may have been added after the initial draft, and is to be accounted for by the following annotation by the writer in the upper margin of the page. The points underlined correspond to those I mentioned to you orally, which when I had to describe the vision again, I inserted into the account, in keeping with your desire. As I observe all of these details, an enormous door to the house opens, in the facade overlooking the garden, and a bright light emerges from within. It proceeds from a peristyle which is brilliantly illuminated. Facing this door is another one, which is certainly in the facade overlooking the street. At a given moment it is opened, as if someone had knocked outside. A group of people enters, surrounding a stretcher carried by 4 stout men dressed in a dark color, resembling a grey wool. They set their burden down in the midst of the peristyle as the door to the house is immediately closed again with care. When the cloth covering the stretcher is lifted, I see it contains a body lying extended, entirely wrapped in a shroud. This body is reverently raised up and laid out, without the shroud, which remains on the stretcher, on a kind of cot, covered with a precious purple cloth, which seems to be embroidered as if it were damask. It was certainly prepared in advance to receive its burden. I see the martyr Agnes, stiffened in death. Her face, little hands, and small feet, bearing sandals, are so pale that she looks like a snow-white marble statue. She is dressed entirely in white, with a snow-white veil which totally envelops her. Her first veil is provided by her shining blonde, knee-length hair, which is now completely loose, like a golden cloak. It is not curly, but soft and slightly wavy, very abundant, and most beautiful. She is smiling as if before a peaceful vision. Her hands are joined over her abdomen, and she is holding a palm, her only ornament, in her stiffened fingers. She is totally spotless. It is clear they have washed away the blood and dressed her in clean clothing before bringing her here, for there is no longer blood on her face, hair, and robe. The wound on her neck is not visible. They have reverently covered it with her hair and veil. Her relatives approach her and kiss her, weeping over her waxen little hands and frozen brow, but their sorrow is orderly and dignified. None of the manifestations of hysteria which are common in such cases. A Christian sorrow. After the relatives, her friends and brothers and sisters in faith throng around her. I see Emerentiana at once weeping and smiling before the foster sister who has preceded her into glory. All bid farewell to the martyr and pray. Here I get the impression, which I forget to write down in the first version, limiting myself to telling you orally, of a great love among the Christians, the sensation of what the communion of the saints is, just as it was understood by the early Christians, from whom we could learn so much. They had come, defying all dangers, to pay homage to Christ's martyr, to implore her, now raised into heaven, to be a source of intercession for all of them before God in the upcoming combats for the faith, and it seemed to me that she was already gliding in spirit over those present, infusing her heroic sentiments and protection into them. Heaven and earth were communicating. At this point the outer door opens again, and an old man enters, accompanied by 2 men between 25 and 35 years of age. The old man has a sweetly serious expression. He is very thin. I would say he's in pain, and quite pale. He must be a very influential person among the Christians, for all kneel when he appears, and he passes, blessing, between 2 rows of bowed heads. I get the impression that he is a bishop, or the pontiff himself. He draws near the stretcher and blesses the dead girl, and prays over her. He then dons his priestly robes. I see the pallium, I don't know if this is the term, which is a white band forming a sort of circle over his shoulders and chest, and then descending in back and in front in 2 bands. The entire surface is adorned with little dark crosses. Those accompanying him also don their robes, putting on the vestments for deacons, a knee-length tunic, and sleeves extending to slightly above their elbows. The funeral procession then forms. In front are the clergy, that is, the elderly man, the 2 deacons, and the other priests, who were previously scattered among the throng of Christians, and who have also put on their priestly stoles. Around them, men bearing lit torches position themselves. They are wearing short, dark robes. I would say they are the servants and Christians, for I get the impression that all in the house are followers of Jesus. Around the stretcher as well, a row of lamps borne by the virgins, dressed and veiled in white, is formed, a veritable hedge of lilies around the clipped lily. The stretcher is easily lifted by 4 virgins, including Emerentiana. It must not weigh very much, for though Agnes, laid out as she is, seems taller than when alive, she is still a teenager, and in addition not very buxom. The funeral procession heads towards the tomb along the garden path. All are carrying lit torches or lanterns, and they are singing, in a low voice, a hymn full of sweetness and hope, which I do not recognize at first. I seem to have heard those words before, but I don't know where. The evening wind bends the flames, which then straighten up, more beautiful than before. I distinctly see a lock of Agnes's hair, which has emerged from underneath the veil, and is moving under a puff of breeze. The procession is very orderly and reverent. They reach the edge of the garden. A sort of shaft is there, with a very large opening. A little stairway cut into the sandstone or tufa leads downward. Many descend. Those who are unable remain on the edge of the shaft and continue to sing, responding to the singing below. In the hollow of the shaft, the voices resonate, and I clearly understand what they involve. They are verses from the Apocalypse, at the point where it speaks of the virgins who follow the Lamb. Footnote, Revelations chapter 14, verse 4. One verse is sung by the men, the next alternately by the women, the way I wrote them in the first account. I see that the shaft is semicircular, rather horseshoe-shaped, and passages start from it radially. It is like this, and then she draws a little picture of a U-shaped cave. Where I have marked the cross, there is a burial niche dug into the sandstone, prepared for Agnes, the first one in this sepulchre, the future tomb of many martyrs, and a catacomb. The first of the burial niches to the right of the cross, as you look, the one I have marked with a V, is the deepest. It runs from 5 or 6 meters into the earth, whereas the others are less profound, and one, the first on the left, as you look, beside the stairway, has barely been begun. I get the impression that it is a hypogeum, which has just been started, almost as if Agnes's death had caught it unprepared. The relatives and those closest draw near for a final farewell. The edges of the purple cloth on which the martyr is lying are then raised over her, and she is wrapped in this precious cloth from head to foot. The pontiff bids farewell to her for the last time. Vieni, sponsa Christi, Vieni, Agnes Sanctissima, requiescant in pace, as if he were receiving her in the name of the Church, and the body is lifted with devotion and laid out in the burial niche, over which a stone closing it is rolled in place. And the vision comes to a halt like this. There remains in me the sweetness of the singing, and the religiosity of the whole scene, in its smallest details, in which the union of the ancient Christians and their fervor are evident. I have written this vision down again at the behest of Jesus, who says to me, "This is another probatory fact. Only someone who has viewed a scene which has made a powerful impression on him can repeat the account of it exactly after some days' time." He tells me this tonight, January 23rd at 12 o'clock. That is, when I have written for the reason given to me at the outset. Still, January 20th at 11:30 p.m. to be written after the narration of the vision. Footnote, the vision of Agnes's burial, written twice. See note 95. The Virgin Agnes says, "Do not look just at my body. Rather, look at my spirit, blessed in the place where the canticle you like so much is sounding. There I am, happy. No more of what was a momentary pain for me on earth came with me into the dwelling of the spouse, but I encountered only ineffable rejoicing. There, in the light emanating from God, our joy, we live in peace. The harmonies of the blessed are interlaced with those of the angels. All is light and harmony. On high, the most holy Trinity shines, and the Mother of God smiles. You cannot conceive of what paradise is, even though you received a flash of it in the vision of January 10th. To know it in its full rejoicing would be to die, for it is blessedness unbearable for the flesh, which dies of it. God gives you a taste of it to encourage you in the face of trials, as he did with us, who suffered for him. Come, pain ceases, and joy lasts forever. Pain, when seen from this place, is an instant of time. The glory which pain gives us is eternal. Here it is, he who loves us, and in loving him we do not commit a sin, but deserve a reward. Jesus has rescued you with his love. Love him with your love, to deserve to join the choir, filling blessed paradise. After she departed at 6 p.m., I remained in the joy of that harmony in that vision, but it then changed into the presence of the glorified body. Footnote, in the sense of spirit, as stated in the beginning of the preceding dictation, of Agnes, most beautiful, dressed in white and with an enraptured gaze, and I seemed to feel 2 small hands sweetly caressing me, the little hands of a girl. I drifted into drowsiness that way, a wearisome drowsiness, for the tremendous pains, it is the night between Thursday and Friday, give me no rest. Having regained awareness as my pains become sharper and sharper, and I think of what I saw in order to relieve them, the young martyr says these words to me. I now lie back, feeling her close to me, to console my martyrdom in flesh and heart. Only my spirit is blessed, but it strikes midnight, and Friday begins. I think of my Lord on his tragic Friday of Passion, and do not complain about suffering. I ask only that he enable me to suffer well, for him and for souls.